For 3 years, I've been making 2 cups of coffee every morning. I don't know when I'll stop. My hand just reaches for the second mug on its own, the one with the chipped handle that my wife always claimed as hers, and by the time I realize what I've done, the coffee is already poured. I let it go cold on the counter. Then I wash both cups and start the day. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years building custom homes across central Tennessee, and when my knees finally told me it was time to retire, I listened. My wife, Carolyn, had been looking forward to those retirement years more than I had. She had a whole list: road trips, grandchildren, a garden with tomatoes that actually tasted like something. She made it 11 months into retirement before the cancer took her. Fast and merciless, the kind that doesn't negotiate. After she passed, my son told me to sell the house. He said it was too much for one person to maintain. He wasn't wrong about that. The yard alone was a part-time job, but I couldn't do it. That house was 32 years of Carolyn. Her handprints were in the caulking around the master bathroom tile because she insisted on helping me regrout it herself one Saturday in 2009. I wasn't ready to sand those away. My son and his wife had moved back to Tennessee 8 years ago when he took a job managing a regional supply company. Before that, we'd seen them twice a year, maybe 3 times if the holidays lined up right. When they moved back, Carolyn and I thought we were finally going to have the family dinners and Sunday afternoons we'd been waiting for. For a while, we did. Then my daughter-in-law decided she didn't care for the way I gave parenting opinions nobody had asked for, and things cooled off in a way that never fully warmed back up. After Carolyn died, I became useful again, not as a father, as a resource. The first request came 4 months after the funeral. My son needed help buying into a business partnership, a small landscaping operation he wanted to expand. He was short on collateral. Could I co-sign? I did, without hesitating. 2 years later, he needed a truck for the business. His credit had taken a hit from the partnership restructuring. My name went on the title. Then there were smaller things. Help with a down payment on a boat they used twice. Coverage for a medical bill when their insurance lapsed. I never said no. He was my son. Carolyn would have done the same. What I got in return was a phone call on my birthday, Christmas, and when something needed signing. My grandson, who was 16, used to text me occasionally. Short messages, memes mostly, the way teenagers communicate when they're not sure how to say they're thinking of you. I treasured those. My granddaughter was in college across the state and had her own life building around her. I understood that. I just didn't understand how my son had grown so comfortable with my silence. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, my son called. Not to ask for anything, or so it seemed. He and my daughter-in-law were planning a long weekend trip to Savannah, Georgia. They'd rented a house near the waterfront, had dinner reservations lined up, planned to walk the historic district. He thought I might want to come along. Get some fresh air. See something new, he said. His wife had suggested it. That last part should have told me everything. My daughter-in-law had not suggested a single thing that benefited me in 8 years of knowing her. She was not a cruel woman exactly, but she had a way of making me feel like a guest who'd overstayed in my own son's life. The idea that she'd suggested bringing me along on their vacation sat wrong, the way a piece of furniture sits wrong in a room, slightly off from where it should be. But I said yes. Because I was lonely in a way that's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it, the specific gravity of a house full of someone else's absence. And because somewhere under all my wariness, I still wanted to believe my son was the man I thought I'd raised. They picked me up on a Friday morning. My daughter-in-law was driving. She was pleasant in the tightly controlled way she always was with me, like someone being polite at a meeting they'd rather not attend. My son sat in the passenger seat and talked at me about the business for the first hour. Not to me, at me. The way men talk when they want to fill silence without actually communicating. I watched Tennessee give way to Georgia through the back window and told myself I was being too cynical. The first real sign came at lunch. We stopped at a place outside Chattanooga, a barbecue restaurant my son said he'd read about online. When I reached for the menu, my daughter-in-law put her hand over mine. Just briefly. She said the pulled pork would probably sit too heavy on my stomach for the drive, that she remembered me complaining about digestion issues at Christmas. I had complained about no such thing. My digestion is fine. I told her that. She smiled at me the way people smile at someone they've decided is confused. My son said maybe the chicken was a safer choice. Not as a suggestion. As a conclusion. When the server came, he ordered for me without asking. I sat there holding a menu I hadn't been allowed to use and felt the first cold clarity of understanding that this trip was not about spending time with me. I didn't say anything. I've spent 68 years learning when to speak and when to watch. I watched. In Savannah, the rental house was a narrow 2-story in the historic district, beautiful bones, tall ceilings, a small courtyard in the back with an iron table and 2 chairs. My room was on the ground floor, which they explained was better for my knees. It was also directly beside the water heater, which ran intermittently all night and faced the alley rather than the street. Their room had the balcony. That first evening, we had dinner at a restaurant on the riverfront. Expensive. The kind of place with lighting designed to make everyone look like they're having the best night of their life. My daughter-in-law had made the reservation and apparently knew the owner of some restaurant in the same hospitality group, which she mentioned twice to our server. She ordered wine. She didn't ask if I wanted any. When I flagged the server for a glass of bourbon, my son leaned across the table and said quietly that maybe I should take it easy, that alcohol interacted badly with one of my blood pressure medications. I do take blood pressure medication. It does not interact badly with an occasional bourbon. I have had this conversation with my actual doctor. I told my son that. He nodded slowly. The way you nod at someone you've decided not to argue with because you've already decided they're wrong. My daughter-in-law excused herself to say hello to someone she recognized across the restaurant. While she was gone, a couple sat down at the table beside ours, a man and woman around my son's age, clearly on a nice evening out. My son struck up a conversation with them the way he does, easy and charming. He got that from Carolyn. When the topic of our trip came up, he put his hand on my shoulder. My dad needed to get out of the house, he said. He's been having a rough stretch since my mother passed. We wanted to keep an eye on him. I was sitting right there. I had driven cross-state. I was holding a dinner menu and wearing my good blazer and keeping an eye on him. I had excused myself and walked to the riverfront outside. The Savannah River was black and wide and indifferent, which was exactly what I needed. I stood there and thought about Carolyn, about what she would have said if she'd been at that table. She would have said something sharp and precise, the kind of comment that sounds like a compliment until it lands. She had a gift for that. I always pretended to disapprove of it. I miss it every single day. My son found me outside after a few minutes. He asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. He said my daughter-in-law had ordered dessert for the table. We went back inside. I ate the dessert I hadn't been consulted about, crème brûlée, which is perfectly fine, but not what I would have chosen. The next morning, I woke up early out of habit. The house was quiet. I made coffee in the rental kitchen, took it to the small courtyard, and started making a list in my head of what I actually knew. 1. They had invited me on this trip out of nowhere after years of distance. 2. Since arriving, every interaction involved someone else making decisions about what I should eat, drink, and say. 3. My son had described me to strangers as someone who needed watching. I thought about the documents I'd signed over the years, the business co-signature, the truck title, a storage unit I'd co-signed on 2 years ago that I'd nearly forgotten about. My name was scattered through their financial life like seeds, and I had never paid attention to where they'd taken root. I went back inside to get a second cup of coffee and noticed my jacket on the hook by the door where I'd hung it the night before. I reached into the inner pocket from habit, checking for my wallet. My wallet was there, but I had also tucked my business card holder in that pocket, the old leather one with my contractor's license and a few emergency contacts. It wasn't there. I checked the pockets again, checked my bag, checked the room. It was gone. Now, a business card holder is not a critical item, but I had kept one particular card in it for years, the personal cell number of Martin Creech, my attorney, handwritten on the back of his card. The kind of number you keep precisely because you hope never to need it. I stood in my room and something settled into place in my chest the way a level settles on a surface. Not panic, clarity. I went back to the courtyard and sat with my coffee until I heard them moving around upstairs. When they came down, my daughter-in-law was dressed for a day out. She told me they'd made plans to take a boat tour of the waterway that morning, just the two of them, already ticketed, limited capacity. She'd booked it weeks ago and there hadn't been room for a third. She was very sorry. She smiled when she said it. There were sandwiches in the refrigerator. I said that was fine. I'd explore the city on my own. My son looked at me for a moment, something passing behind his eyes that I couldn't quite name. Then my daughter-in-law touched his arm and they left. I waited 20 minutes. Then I called an Uber, took it to the nearest branch of my bank, and asked to speak with someone privately. The teller who helped me was a young woman who treated me like an adult, which I appreciated more than she probably realized. I explained that I was traveling and wanted to check recent account activity and put a temporary hold on any new authorized users. When she pulled up my accounts, she went quiet for a moment in a professional way. There had been a transaction the previous afternoon. My son had attempted to access my investment account through a shared access credential I had set up years ago when Carolyn was ill, so he could manage things if something happened to me. The transaction had been flagged and paused by the bank's security system because it was initiated from an out-of-state device. The attempted transfer was for $40,000 to his business account. I sat in that chair and didn't say anything for a long moment. The teller asked if I was all right. I told her I was and asked her to revoke the shared access credential entirely and flag the account for manual review on any large transactions. She did it without question. I thanked her and left. I found a coffee shop 2 blocks away, sat at a table by the window, and thought, the access credential, the business co-signature, my name on that truck title, whatever was in that storage unit lease, my name on things I had never thought twice about because he was my son and I trusted him the way you trust your own reflection. I didn't go back to the rental house that afternoon. I walked the city instead, the squares and the Spanish moss and the old buildings that had been standing long enough to watch whole families rise and fall and rise again. I had a real lunch at a counter restaurant where a man named Douglas, retired from the army, talked to me for an hour about woodworking. I paid for both our meals. It was the best conversation I'd had in months. I went back to the rental house in the early evening. They were already there. My daughter-in-law was on the back patio with a glass of wine. My son was on his phone in the kitchen. When he saw me, something moved across his face. Relief, maybe, or recalculation. He asked how my day was. I said it was fine. I asked how the boat tour had been. He said it was good. We had dinner at the house that night, pasta from a takeout place. My daughter-in-law was quieter than usual. My son kept checking his phone. I went to bed early and lay there listening to the water heater run. In the morning, I came downstairs at 6:30 to find the house empty. Their bags were gone. Their car was gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter, in my son's handwriting. Dad, something came up with the business. Had to head back early. Didn't want to wake you. Drive safe. We'll talk soon. I didn't have a car. I had driven down with them. I stood in that kitchen in an unfamiliar city, 68 years old, and read that note 3 times. Then I poured the last of the coffee they hadn't bothered to leave for me, sat down at the iron table in the courtyard, and started making a different kind of list. The Uber back to the bus station cost me $11. The ticket to Atlanta cost $34. The flight from Atlanta to Nashville cost $280, which was considerably less than $40,000, which was what they had tried to take while I was sleeping in the room beside the water heater. I called Martin Creech from the airport. He answered on the 3rd ring, which told me he kept that number active even on weekends. I told him what had happened. I told him about the business co-signature, the truck title, the storage unit, the attempted transfer. I told him I needed to understand exactly where my name was, what my rights were, and what my options were. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Gerald, I need you to come into the office Monday morning and bring every document you can find. Every one." I said I'd be there. The flight was smooth. Tennessee from the air looked the way it always looks, green and folded and quiet. When the cab dropped me at my house, I stood in the driveway for a moment looking at it. The gutters needed cleaning. The hydrangeas Carolyn had planted along the fence were beginning to bud. The house looked like what it was, a place that had been loved for a long time and was still standing. I went inside and got to work. I found the business co-signature documents in the file cabinet in my office, the one Carolyn had organized with colored tabs when I'd retired and declared my filing system a public hazard. There was the original agreement, and there was a clause I had signed without reading closely enough. In the event of a payment default, as co-signer, I held a secondary interest in the business assets proportional to my guarantee. I had guaranteed $250,000. The truck title listed me as co-owner, equal standing. The storage unit lease had my name as primary leaseholder. My son was listed as an authorized user. I had forgotten that. I had signed whatever he put in front of me because he was my son and I was grieving, and I had not been thinking clearly for a long time. Martin's face on Monday morning was the face of a man who had seen this before but still found it unpleasant to look at. He walked me through it methodically. The business co-signature was the significant one, because the landscaping company had restructured 18 months ago and taken on debt that was now approaching default. My guarantee could technically be called. But the flip side of that guarantee was my secondary interest in the assets, equipment, contracts, receivables. If the business went into default, I had a legal claim. The truck was simpler. Equal co-ownership meant I could petition to sell. Tennessee had a clear process for that. The storage unit was simplest of all. I was the primary leaseholder. I could remove the secondary user at any time with 30 days written notice. Martin said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do everything I legally can." He nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think people sometimes tell these stories like revenge is clean and satisfying in the way movies make it look. It isn't. What I felt, going through that process, was not triumph. It was grief. It was the specific grief of watching someone you raised become someone you don't recognize, of having to use legal mechanisms against your own child because love had stopped being enough protection. But I did it. I filed the notice to remove my son as authorized user on the storage unit. Within 30 days, I had the right to access it. I found two things inside: business equipment he'd been storing there to hide it from his creditors, and a set of financial documents that showed the business had been in deeper trouble than he'd told anyone. I handed those documents to Martin. Martin used them. The truck sold at a dealership for $31,000. My son had paid $47,000 for it 2 years prior. $31,000 was fair for the market, and fair was what I was interested in. When the business entered formal default proceedings, my secondary interest was recognized. I wasn't vindictive about the business. I didn't try to take more than what I was owed. I worked with Martin and the creditors to receive what the guarantee entitled me to, and nothing beyond that. Some of the equipment went to pay back debts. I received a settlement that covered what I had put in and a portion of what I had lost. My son called me 22 days after leaving me in Savannah. His voice was not the voice of a man calling to apologize. It was the voice of a man who'd realized the plan had not worked the way it was supposed to. He said I had sabotaged his family. He said I had destroyed something he'd spent years building. He said his wife was devastated that they might lose their house. I let him finish. Then I said, "You left me in a city I didn't know without a car and without telling me you were going. You tried to transfer $40,000 out of my account the night before you left. You've been using my name on your financial obligations for years while treating me like someone who needed to be managed on vacation. I did not sabotage your family. I protected myself. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, Mom would be ashamed of you. I held the phone and looked at the hydrangeas through the kitchen window. They were fully bloomed now, purple and heavy. Carolyn had planted the first one from a cutting her mother had given her, and over the years she'd propagated them until they ran the full length of the fence, a ridiculous amount of hydrangeas, more than any sensible garden needed. She loved them completely and without apology. No, I said. She wouldn't. I hung up. There are things I didn't expect about the months that followed. I expected the legal process to be draining, and it was. I expected the silence from my son to settle around the house like weather. What I did not expect was how much lighter I felt. Not happy lighter. The way a room feels after you've cleared out furniture that had been blocking the windows. I hired a kid from down the street to help me with the gutters. I signed up for a woodworking class at the community center, thinking about the man named Douglas from Savannah, thinking it wasn't too late to learn something new with my hands. 3 men in the class were around my age, and one of them had also recently lost his wife. We didn't talk about that directly. We talked about joinery and wood grain and the particular satisfaction of making a box that closes cleanly. But we were talking about it. I thought about my grandchildren. My grandson still sent occasional texts, shorter now, more cautious, the way a teenager gets when adults around him are fighting. I texted back simply, consistently, always just glad to hear from him, never asking about his parents, never putting him in the middle of something that wasn't his to carry. My granddaughter was quieter. Then, about 4 months after the phone call with my son, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box, handmade, clearly a project from some class or craft fair, with a card tucked under the lid. The card said, I know what really happened. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I've been thinking about you a lot. Is it okay if I come visit this summer? Your granddaughter. I sat at the kitchen table for a while with that card and that box. The box wasn't perfect. The dovetail joints on the corners were slightly uneven and the lid sat just a little crooked. It was exactly the kind of first project a beginner makes, all effort and earnestness and not quite there yet. I put it on the mantel next to a photograph of Carolyn. I don't know what my son and daughter-in-law told their children about what happened. I don't know what version of me my granddaughter had been given to work with before she decided to reach out anyway. I don't know if things will ever be repaired, or what repair would even look like, or whether I want it. What I know is that I am 68 years old and I am still here. I make 1 cup of coffee most mornings now. Not every morning yet, but most. I spend Thursday evenings in a woodworking class with 3 men I'm beginning to think of as friends. I walk in the mornings when the weather allows, past the park where Carolyn and I used to walk, and sometimes I stop at the bench we always stopped at, and I sit for a while with whatever the day holds, and I find that I am not afraid of it. My granddaughter is coming in July. I've already started planning what I'll make for dinner. Something real, something I choose, made in the kitchen of a house where I still know every corner, every sound the pipes make at night, every place where Carolyn's presence is so worked into the walls that it will never fully leave. There is a version of this story where I tell you I am at peace, fully and cleanly. I'm not sure that's exactly true. I think what I am is present to my own life in a way I wasn't when I was managing everyone else's feelings, and signing papers I didn't read and making 2 cups of coffee for someone who was no longer there to drink hers. I watered the hydrangeas this morning, all of them, down the full length of the fence, a ridiculous amount for one person to tend. I did it anyway. Carolyn would have wanted them kept up. And if I'm honest, so do I.